Hello everybody and welcome to the Radiator Arms, our little corner of the internet where we like to welcome one and all to talk cars and everything else. I'm James from JayEmm on Cars, and to my left we have Ant.
Hello.
From Sports and Touring, and of course JayEmm and Friends, and also of JayEmm and Friends we've got to my right the man in the cans, Will the Plank.
Hello everyone.
And recently having done an episode all about the joy of Japanese machinery, today we're bringing it home and we're going to be talking about British cars. But, gentlemen, first, something very important that we need to discuss. What actually makes a car of a certain country? Because, you see, I recently have been told off a little bit by the internet, for I did a video in which I drove a Dodge Challenger, which I'd call an American car. Would you call that an American car, Will?
Yeah.
And
I would.
But it's not built in America, it's built in Canada.
Oh.
And apparently, some Americans are using that as an excuse to say it is not an American car.
Did Dodge apologise profusely for that? Because that's what Canadians are known for, saying sorry.
I think quite a few American cars are actually produced in Canada, including, somebody correct me if I'm wrong here, the recent Ford GT.
Oh, yeah, Multimac in Canada.
Yeah. Now, to me, I think what is really important is the headquarters of the company that built the vehicle. And I think the main time this gets a little bit confusing is particularly with the likes of either Ford or General Motors products, when people, of course, will know that Ford is an American company. However, most of the cars that are built that British people are familiar with are instead the product of Ford of Europe. Yep. Which is based out of Germany, of course, related to and run by Ford headquarters over in the USA, but they are European cars. Yes, owned by an American company, but ultimately built in Europe for your European customer.
When I was a kid, I thought Fords were British because all I knew was the Fiesta, the Escort, the Sierra, and to me they were just British cars.
Same with Vauxhalls as well, if I'm honest.
Yeah. In fact, I didn't know this until I did some research on it, but Vauxhall has been a part of General Motors for something like nearly 100 years. I thought it was a much more recent acquisition, and it's not. Of course, on the continent, they are badged as Opels, and I think most people knew that, though really confusingly, and this probably hasn't helped things, up until, I guess, about 20, 30 years ago, you could still buy an Opel-badged car in Britain.
Really?
Yes. Things like the Opel Manta. They were sold here.
Oh, I used to love those.
Yeah. So that's a little bit confusing. But to me, a Dodge Challenger, very clearly American car. In fact, I would almost go so far to say the archetypal American car. Same for a Mustang. I don't care where you build it, it is clearly an American car. Now, it gets confusing with things like the new Supra. Because that, you could say, oh, it's a Japanese car, but it's not really, is it? It is a rebodied, slightly tweaked BMW Z4 built in Austria. Old Supra, definitely Japanese. Your RX-8, definitely Japanese. But Britain's cars. When I say British cars, what are the first things that come to mind?
Old Rovers, let's be honest. It's stuff I just think of like SD1s and anything V8, and then obviously I think of the classic Mini. I'd obviously think of the Austin Maestro as well, but that's, for obvious reasons.
I will give you your time to shine soon.
Yes, exactly. And, just things like Rover Group, those British Leyland, that's what comes to mind immediately.
The shame. And...
Well, see, this is the thing. I think of TVR as very much a British brand, a British company. I think this is it. Like British cars, is it the brand or the company. Because obviously Rolls-Royce you think of as a British car, but it's basically BMW, it's German now.
Yeah.
Bentley you'd think of as a British brand, but it is a British brand, but owned by a German company, i.e. Volkswagen. What else have we got? That's MG, Chinese owned.
Yeah, and I believe all Chinese built now as well.
Yeah. In fact, arguably the Nissan Qashqai is more British than the than something like the MG, because at least they build them here.
Were they built in Sunderland or something like that?
Yeah.
Is that the plant, Sunderland?
Yeah. Does Honda still have a plant here? They did have one in Swindon.
Yeah, I don't know if that's still there.
Because for a long time they said they were going to close it, then they weren't so sure, then they said actually they're not going to close it, then they said they are going to close it. I know that Toyota build stuff here as well, because it made the news the other day that the GR Corolla is going to be built in the United Kingdom.
Oh, great.
I mean, it's very common, of course, these days for a large automotive manufacturer to have many sites around the world. The old Toyota Yaris, for example, was built in Belgium. I don't know about the current one. I think they're built in a few different places. I mean, any model that's popular enough will probably have a few different manufacturing sites.
And also I think where the car is being sold will depend on where it's being built as well, I think. Like if you could get a car for the UK that, say, BMW, I don't know, some of them, I don't even think there was, some of the 3 Series, E46, I don't think they were all built in Germany. I think they were...
The Compact was built in, I believe, South America?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the Compact specifically.
Yeah, and so I think it depends where the car is going to in the world as well as to where it's built sometimes. I know that is a thing.
It can alter, but you will, of course, get things like the Toyota Tundra, whose entire tagline is made in Texas. And of course, that's a really big selling point. But it's also pretty smart business from Toyota there, because the majority of the customers for the Tundra are going to be in the United States, to the point that I'm fairly certain there are people in the States that have convinced themselves that a Toyota is an American car.
Yep. So they had many more years of lead poisoning from fuel. Sorry, no joke. That is actually a scientific truth.
Yeah. I know. That's why it's funny.
Yeah.
You bitch.
So sorry, American audience.
Sorry, I don't mean to be such a bitch, but honestly, just on occasion,
It just comes naturally, doesn't it? Yeah. Oh my
sassy
word.
little thing, me.
All right, gents.
But yeah, what about you, James?
Well, I think you've both missed what is arguably one of the most iconic British brands of all time. Aston Martin.
Aston Martin, yeah. That's probably the only one that's left, really, isn't it?
What, the Aston Martin owned by the Canadian businessman?
Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah, fair enough.
Same as Jaguar Land Rover, which is now owned. It was owned by Tata. I'm not quite sure who owns it at the minute. I think they might still have a hand in it.
They're owned by Ford at one point as well, weren't they?
Yeah, that was some time ago.
Yeah.
Ford actually acquired a stake in them earlier than people realised. They bought into them in the 1980s, and then I think in the 1990s took over more or less complete control of the company. Did invest quite heavily, though. Ford sort of have a way where every company they buy, I think they try and turn it into another version of Ford. They're not very good at dealing with really small companies, and so that's why stuff like the X-Type happened, because they bought Jaguar and were like, cool, great, now let's try and get it to sell 1 million cars a year, and it's Jaguar. It's never really going to work.
On the subject of Aston Martin, did you know that they were nearly bought by Nissan at one point?
Oh, I didn't know that.
And that is how Andy Palmer ended up going from Nissan as chief operating officer to CEO of Aston Martin.
Yep.
Oh.
There's a whole story on that over on JayEmm on Cars. Go and search it now, Dr. Andy Palmer.
Yeah, we interviewed him, and what they were effectively trying to do was they had, Nissan, then above that they had Infiniti, and then they wanted above that Aston Martin. And we believe that the reason they didn't eventually buy into it is because they took a look at the financials and found out that they weren't maybe as good as they hoped. But that probably shouldn't be a surprise for a company that's almost proud of the fact that it's gone bankrupt, I think, 7 times in its history. It's quite amazing. Aston Martin is a wonderful place full of some oddball people, but making money, not really their strength.
And then what happened was... one of the people at Aston Martin got in touch with Andy Palmer and said, look, even though Nissan isn't interested in buying it, are you interested in working with us? He wanted to be a CEO of a company. He had always admired Aston Martin. He knew that he was never likely to become a CEO of Nissan because at that time there was, I think, a statement made that there will never be a non-Japanese CEO of Nissan. So he knew that wasn't going to be an option, even though he was like COO at the time. There was only one more step for him, and that was CEO. So he explored the opportunity, went there, and he was the first person to actually get Aston Martin to make a profit, wasn't he?
Probably. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
They still make a profit these days?
Who knows?
No idea. The thing you have to understand about car companies and their quarterly reports is what they say they've done and what they've actually done are often quite separate things, and there is nothing less trustworthy than hard facts and accounts. Of course, one thing about British cars is there are a great number of brands, sadly no longer with us, some from recent times like Rover. I think in a lot of ways in the British psyche, MG is still dead. In my mind, it is.
Yeah.
I know they are building cars, but that is a company that's taken MG, the badge, and is now just doing its own thing.
But that's always the thing, though, isn't it? It's like, they're brands. They're not car companies per se. These companies are buying the brand and then building the cars. In some cases, the actual company is bought and preserved in some form, shape or form.
Well, MG did for a while continue manufacturing in Great Britain, and then they kind of shut it down.
It's in the old Longbridge plant, wasn't it?
It was,
Yeah.
And of course, you got likes of TVR, but also Bristol.
Oh, don't get me started on Bristols. I love a Bristol.
They were possibly some of the most eccentric cars ever made, and there are a few that they've built. I can't remember the model numbers because they all sound the same, but some of them are indescribably ugly. Stuff like, I think the Blenheim, I want to say, you look at it and it looks like, we see now those renders where somebody's taken like a child's drawing of a cat, which has got like 5 legs, none of them in the right place and all that sort of stuff. And they make like, this is what it would look like if that's what a cat was actually like. Well, some of those Bristols looked like that, but that if a child had tried to draw a Ford Capri. They are hideous.
Is it like the car that Homer designed in The Simpsons?
Oh, no, not that.
No, it's not that good.
No.
Yeah. There was one, and this is hilarious, right? Because I found myself in a bit of a sort of, Wikipedia black hole trying to look up information on these cars. Because the only Bristols that I've driven, there's 3 of them, which granted is 3 more than the vast majority of people. But I drove, was it the 404?
404.
404, which
411.
is in the 50s, which is a really cool, could have been race car of its day that I think is kind of beautiful in its own way. And you could easily see parked up outside a gentleman's club back in the day, or a posh hotel in Mayfair, that sort of thing. Probably because that's how far it got from the showroom in Kensington before it broke down. But still, then the 411 is a 1970s saloon that actually is also quite cool, and other than some terrifying braking issues on the particular one that we drove, is an awesome bit of kit that I really quite enjoyed, and then been effectively resto modded, so it's a 70s car made newish. And then I've driven the Fighter, which is easily one of the things I was just most excited to do, and I'm proudest that I've done, because so few people have even seen a Bristol Fighter. This is one of those cars that I was genuinely convinced didn't actually exist. You hear about companies, you see they've built like a couple of prototype cars, maybe one even gets as far as like going on Top Gear or something like that. Cars like the Noble M15, where you remember it existing because you've seen it on the telly, and then you learn that was it, that was the only one, and they never made any more. Well, the Bristol Fighter, they did actually make a handful, and now this company, SLJ Hackett, are finishing off the remaining chassis. And so I got to drive one of those, and that was a very, very cool thing, but still desperately quirky. And I found out a price list recently, and they wanted something like £250,000 for one of those. When you could have bought like a top of the line 911 Turbo for half the money, or you could have had an all singing, all dancing Ferrari for about 80 grand less, which would have just been a different world in terms of build quality, the driving experience, availability of dealerships, stuff like that. All the sorts of stuff that people forget when it comes to talking about small car companies. Like, it's one thing actually building a car. It's a completely different thing getting people to support it and look after it. Got to talk, of course, about one of my great love affairs, Lotus.
Yes.
Lotus is a very special brand, also, of course, these days owned by the Chinese, but which still does just build cars in Britain. A lot also built in China, but I think nobody really considers those to be a proper Lotus anyway. However, the heritage, the engineering, the history, that's never going to go away. And that, I think, is that means a lot to people. When you talk about brands, of course, that's what you're always thinking about.
Lotus is a car I've never driven, obviously, and that's something I would like to experience at some point, I think. A good Lotus.
What sort of Lotus would appeal to you?
Is it the Elise, the original kind of ones from the 90s, 80s, 90s?
90s, yeah. 1995, I think.
Because they used like Rover K series and stuff at one point.
They did in the early days, yeah.
Those are one of the ones I'd like to give a go. Would I fit?
I was just about to say, would you? Because the S1 is pretty tight.
Yeah, he fit. I think you'd about fit. If you wanted to go in an Esprit, I'd be saying like, I'd leave that as a dream, mate. Like, you would have to pop the roof out. You'd have to drive it like Magnum PI.
Because they did that. Wasn't the VX220 by Vauxhall the same chassis or something like that? Yeah. So I remember always looking at those, thinking those are quite cool.
I wanted one.
Yeah,
the turbo, 2 litre turbo.
As was the Tesla Roadster.
Yep.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? And then obviously with electric gubbins in it.
I remember. This is a long time ago. This is before YouTube. This would be maybe 13, 14 years ago. I remember Dad telling me, he said, James, I went out in a car today. It was electric. And back then I was like, wow, yeah, what was it? And he's like, it was some like Tesla thing. And I was like, okay. And at this point in time, I think that was more or less the only car they'd made. Maybe they'd started making the Model S by then. But they were very rare. And it's easy to forget, the Model S was really expensive. At one point, a Model S, the top one, was about 135 grand.
Yeah.
People forget that, right? So
that's all hatchback now, isn't it?
Yeah. I remember him telling me that he went out and he said it's really weird. He said the initial pull away wasn't that quick, but then it dug in and it was very, very fast. Maybe that was just the way that the guy was driving, but he said that he was quite impressed by it. Like, it was an interesting thing. So what sort of qualities do you feel that a British car should possess?
I'm going to interrupt you because you've went through a lot of stuff there, and I want to go back a little bit.
Go for it, dude.
Yeah.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the Bristol. So the Fighter, which I haven't driven. So I've driven one less Bristol than you, which is 2 more than most people in the world.
Yep.
And but the Fighter, was that based on a Dodge Viper?
No, the engine is from a Viper, but the chassis is actually entirely bespoke.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Well, I didn't remember that because I did watch your review.
It's easy to tell because I think it must be about a foot narrower than a Viper.
Wow.
It's really quite slender.
Yeah, it's such a crazy car. And I have a very special connection with Bristol before we go into the characteristics of what makes a car British. We've actually got a video on this channel on JayEmm and Friends, which if you want to see the whole full story, you can go and watch that. But for Will's benefit, who might not have seen that one.
I haven't.
So when I was in I was about 18, 19, I was coming out of that phase in my life where I was kind of still in that phase where I was on and off homeless. And I got a job in a hotel working in the gift shop. And it was for this company that had concessions in gift shops all over London. And after I'd spent some time working in that shop, I was one of the few people that was reliable enough that if someone called in sick, they could send me to any one of their shops and I could look after it. So one of them was the Olympia, the Hilton Olympia, which is Kensington, and it's literally 2 doors down from the old Bristol showroom.
Yeah.
So I would literally, and I ended up working there for quite some time. Well, quite some time from a late teens point of view. It was probably like months.
Yeah.
And and I used to walk past that showroom in the morning and just look in there and just gaze at the cars, because to me they were just beautiful, and there was something very British about them. And I remember sort of one day staring in there and thinking to myself, right now, the idea of even ever being able to drive one of these cars is impossible. Couldn't even imagine it. And then obviously I told James that story, and then he was like, what are you doing on such and such a day? Do you want to go away for a week of filming? I went, yeah, sounds fun. Like a little, busman's holiday type of thing. He's like, I've got some cars for you to drive. And I went, oh yeah, like what? And he told me, he was like, can I say a beautiful pair of Bristols here? I don't know.
Yeah, you can.
Literally. And I was like, no way. I was like, that's it. Okay, I've got to go.
No, I think I hadn't heard the story.
Was it?
Yeah, I think I hadn't heard the story, and I said to you, I was like, if you're going to be really interested,
that was
in Bristol
it.
stuff,
Yeah.
and I was like, I don't know if you like the Bristols, and you were like, and I
Yeah.
was like, hang on a minute, like there's a story here. I'm like, this is not the reaction I expected, because most people would be like, oh, what? Like,
Yeah.
Because they're well known in particular because the chap who ran the company for much of its life, Tony Crook, was famously eccentric, to the point that, whether this is true or not, I don't know, but I want it to be true. Apparently, one day Michael Winner was looking through the doors of the showroom, and Tony Crook came down and turned the sign to closed. He more or less refused to let people test drive the cars, and that might be because they had a few fans, one of which famously was LJK Setright, the very well-renowned automotive journalist of some considerable repute, passed away some years now, but still well-regarded in many circles. But by and large, certainly by the 1980s and 1990s, Bristol was one of these companies that in the 50s they could keep up, and they had a really cool history to them. But as soon as companies like Jaguar and Rover and that started mass producing cars, they began to advance in a way that Bristol just couldn't keep up with. So the only thing that really kept them going was the fact that they were bought by really weird, quirky people that liked the idea they were going to buy something that absolutely nobody else was going to. And they were really expensive, and they were not particularly good. And when I wound up in this internet rabbit hole looking up stuff on the Blenheim, I found one piece from somebody that actually quite liked it, and one piece where a guy had gone in search of one, trying to find one for review, been rebuked by the company, which was still in business at the time, and managed to find an incredibly disgruntled owner of one who said, and I quote, "There are only two things visible from space, the Great Wall of China and the panel gaps on a Bristol." and basically he's like, the owner walked me around the car and he's like, that's broke, that's shit, that doesn't work, that's falling off. And he just parted with like an unthinkable sum of money for this heap of a car.
Wow.
But that was Bristol. And it was one of these companies that how it survived for as long as it did, I have genuinely no idea. It is a miracle. I think it might have something to do with the fact I don't think it ever paid any staff. But yeah.
Yeah, I think with a lot of these independent car companies that kind of survived a long time, I think, in part, there were probably other reasons for them to exist anyway, which might have been tax efficiencies for someone rather wealthy.
Yes, that's very true.
Yeah.
Now, have you actually ever owned a British car, Ant?
Well, depends.
Where were your Mondeos built?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
I would have thought they'd have been built in...
Probably Germany.
Yeah, I'd have thought in Germany. Because the engines in those, I don't think would have even been built here. See, I got in trouble once because I called a Capri a car built in Dagenham. And the Capri, as far as I'm aware, was never built in Dagenham. Some of the engines were... hence the Essex engine. So Dad had the 3-litre, which is what people tend to think of when you say the Ford Essex engine, and that was built in Dagenham. But the car was built in Halewood, which is near Liverpool. Or at least I believe it's near Liverpool. Apologies if I just offended anyone from either Liverpool or Halewood. And yeah, so we had a lot of factories here producing these things. I mean, the Capri, in fact, and this is, I think, one of the reasons why it's considered by many to be a British car, was so popular here that it remained on sale for 3 years after it was discontinued everywhere else.
Wow.
Yep.
Were they the car that was affectionately known as the Dagenham dustbin? What one was that? Because that's the thing. People correct me if I'm wrong out there. I'm not saying there's any malice or bad intent.
Google's going to have to get involved here.
Yeah, I swear there was like a British kind of Ford thing that was named the Dagenham dustbin. I could be totally wrong.
There could be a few cars that could have worn that name. But yeah, the Capri wasn't built there. And the Capri was generally quite well loved.
Ford Cortina is what you're thinking of.
Cortina,
it,
there
right,
you
okay.
go. Cortinas I've got a little bit of a soft spot for. Though, of course,
Me too.
as is, the life I lead, the one and only Cortina, not only that I've driven, but I think that I've ever been in, was an FIA historic rally prepped Lotus one.
Oh, nice. Yeah, 'cause there was the Lotus
that'll
Cortina,
do it.
wasn't there?
Yeah. Which is easily identifiable because it's cream with green stripes on the side. That was a very, very cool car. But yeah, Ford have made a lot of very, very cool cars over the years.
So I've been fortunate enough to have a tour of the Dagenham factory, the engine plant.
Oh, nice.
And these days, I don't know about now, but at the time, just a few years ago, they were only building diesel engines. That's all they were building.
Yeah. They were building whole vans there at one point, though I don't know if that's stopped as well. Honestly, no idea. I really should brush up. They still build vans in Luton at the Vauxhall plant, the Vivaro.
Yes.
I don't think Ford build any more vehicles in the UK. I think it's only engines now. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. See, this is another thing, going back to the sort of theme of nationality we were talking about earlier, is that my friend Chris, who you both know, has himself a Porsche Boxster, which I think we both agree, German car, right?
Yep.
Built in Finland.
Really?
Yep. Which is a really odd place to build a car, isn't it? Because you wouldn't, when someone says, we didn't build it in Germany, you built it in Finland instead. Because if you said, we didn't build it in Germany, we built it in South America, or we built it in Romania, or somewhere else, you go, they've done that because they want to save a little bit on the labour costs. Whereas Finland, nobody's ever really come home from Finland going, everything was really cheap.
No.
This is what I was on about earlier about I swear the E46, maybe some of the E39s. They weren't all built in Germany. I think some of them were built somewhere else in Europe as well. Because I remember my E46 not being made in Germany and joking with my friends, actually, it is a German car, but it's not a German car. It's never been to Germany kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the parts were perhaps made in Germany and shipped over somewhere. But as I said, this happens with many brands.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it comes down to the total cost. And it depends on loads of things like, how many of the cars you're going to sell. So how much capacity do you need? So you might need multiple plants to meet the capacity for the demand for that car. It could be what parts of the world you're selling it in, because there's no point building a car in Mexico that's not going to be sold in North America and is only going to be sold in Europe. You build them in Europe and vice versa. So there's all different factors. And ultimately it comes down to what's the thing that's going to make the net overall costs of building that car the lowest possible. That's really how it's made.
And it gets particularly interesting because I spoke a while ago to Honda, and believe it or not, now this may not be true anymore, but I suspect it is, Honda's automotive division in the UK, in terms of new car sales, was a loss-making enterprise. Part of the reason for that is because the Civic is built here. So it can be sold here, and it can be sold here at a price which makes it competitive and profitable. But other models that are sold here are built elsewhere. And Honda generally work to quite high standards. They don't really like to cut corners. It's a very typical Japanese thing, and rightly so, I think. But this means that there are certain cars that if they were to actually charge enough for them to make a profit, by the time they'd got them shipped here, the amount they'd have to ask for them is more than anyone's actually going to pay for that particular car. So instead what they do is they try and look at the overall business as a whole, including not just the car sales, but also servicing, parts supply, so on and so forth. And of course, Honda themselves do make money here. If they didn't, they probably wouldn't be here, a bit like Mitsubishi. But yeah, there are elements of the business which don't make money. There are elements of the business which do make money. And of course, for some of these cars, demand will be different for various different places. There'd be no point, for example, making a Yaris in the United States because people just aren't going to buy them over there, which means you've got to export most of them, which is, of course, a very, very large cost.
I was amazed, actually, that the Honda Jazz, or as the Honda Fit as it's known in America, is actually such a big seller over there. They're everywhere, and I didn't think that there's that many people in America crying out for like small hatchbacks. Certainly at the time, anyway.
I think back in the day, fuel there was like a lot cheaper than it is now.
Yeah.
And whilst it's still a lot cheaper there than here, it's now a lot more expensive than it was, and I think that's going to be a factor.
And not everybody in the United States wants a 25-foot long, 3.5-ton, 12-litre V8 pickup truck.
Well, the most popular car there, I'm pretty sure, is the F-150, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Most popular vehicle,
Right.
Yeah.
because it's not a car.
Yes.
Well, I suppose, yeah.
So also,
Passenger vehicle.
this is an interesting factoid for you. Now, I believe this may today no longer strictly be true, but until recently it was. And one of the things that differentiated Toyota from Lexus is that where your Toyota could be built anywhere in the world, a Lexus was always a 100% Japanese car. And that was a big thing for them. And that also accounts partly for the extra cost. Because, we all know that they are built on platforms that are typically shared with a Toyota equivalent. And part of the way that they can achieve the higher quality and also justify the higher quality is by saying, we build it here. And this is, I think, always been a very interesting part of sort of economic psychology. I mean, Will, of course, you're familiar with guitars and you'll know that you have your Mexican fenders and you got your American ones.
And your Japanese ones as well.
Japanese ones as well.
China, one's made in China as well.
There
All
you
over
go.
the place.
So theoretically the same product, but made in different places. Which one's the best?
I always say the guitars, the best one is the one that you can afford.
Yeah.
Actually, because a lot of the time it gets to a point with a lot of the Fender stuff. I'm a big fan of Mexican made Fenders. I feel like a lot of them are pretty close to like the American and Japanese stuff in quality, and they sound just as good. Especially if you can play well, that actually helps too. It's a big thing. I could give James a very expensive Gibson guitar, and
You give me a Stradivarius and I'll make it sound like a cat being strangled.
yeah, exactly. Though my dad, who is like one of the top musicians in the country, he can pick up any cheap plank and he can make it sound like him. So it's with guitars, it's similar. It's as long as the quality is good enough there that it's not awful, then it doesn't really matter where it's made, in my opinion. I also like a lot of the CNC made stuff. I play Saya basses. They're made in Indonesia. They're made by machines. They're not hand routed or routed or however you want to say it. And they play great and they've earned me loads of money. So,
Yeah, sorry for the Australians. He didn't mean to say rooted.
yeah, I know. It's
But I think the question really is like, which is the highest actual quality?
the highest
in terms
actual
of
quality one,
made.
if you want to be honest, is going to be the American ones, because they are probably the ones cherry picked with the nicest materials, and they're the ones more likely to have fancier wiring, fancier tone pots, and I suppose it's one of those, I guess. But it's difficult because the quality between them, in my opinion, doesn't always justify the extra price. And that, I suppose that probably goes to, cars, Toyota and Lexus. Do you think that the extra money there for the Lexus is worth it over the Toyota equivalent?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if that's fair enough, then.
I would agree with that, because the overall fit and finish on the Lexus, the materials, everything. I mean, the LC500, I was so impressed with that.
Oh, it's such a good car.
Honestly, it's great. My brother, if you're watching, yes, I know. Don't worry, I'm not going to steal that dream car from you. I'll let you get that one.
Mine.
But they're there. The interiors are just fantastic.
They are superb.
Even little details like when you open the door and you see the forged carbon in making up the structure of the door. It's like,
I still want to get behind the wheel of an LS400, an early one at some point.
Oh,
that I need to try. That is it the 4-litre V8 ones they were? The original barge, because that is such an important car, because that was a huge turning point in like luxury cars from Japan, wasn't it? The Lexus brand, the early days of it.
Well, what it was is it allowed them to take over America.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because they still haven't managed it in Europe.
No.
But in the States, Japanese cars sold well to American customers for quite some time, particularly in the wake of the fuel crises that they had. A lot of people realized that actually maybe they shouldn't be driving around in big, 7-litre Ford Galaxies and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, when, fuel price like doubles, triples, or quadruples overnight, you can very suddenly gain an interest in having a car that's a bit more economical. And that's when Japanese cars first started to really take a hold in the 70s. But they were only ever really considered shopping carts, effectively. Nice little things, cheap runabouts for the young, the old, or if you're living in a city, you want something economical, whatever, they're great. But they never considered them to be an upmarket luxury product. That was the preserve of the existing American luxury brands, which is also worth noting don't work in Britain. We don't get Cadillac or anything
Too big.
But also, but the Japanese didn't have a hold in this market.
So they pushed a lot of other manufacturers to actually have to up their game with things and up their quality, lower prices, increase fuel efficiency. You just look, the Merc outside, the W124, C124 Coupe, that kind of chassis was actually a big thing about that was Mercedes saying, we're going to make this car so aerodynamic, we're going to make it so much more fuel efficient because of all the pressure from a lot of the Japanese manufacturers, to keep up. I remember watching the old Motor Week reviews and things like that, when I first got the car from you, and I was looking up into it, and they were like, what can Mercedes do to beat off all the Japanese manufacturers coming through, Toyota and Lexus and all those things? And I was like, wow, I don't really think of that car as that fuel efficient, but back then I suppose it probably was for the class it was in.
Yeah, no, they had to do a lot of work to really improve things on all fronts. Fuel efficiency, quality, reliability. Lexus really, they gambled hard with that one, and they really made it work. I could do probably a whole episode just about Lexus. Maybe I'll pester them to get a car out of them. I'll see if they got an LS400 in the heritage fleet.
Oh, yes, please.
If not, I think I do know a few people that have got one. In fact, if anybody out there is listening and you have an early LS400 and you're happy for us to take it out and you for lunch, do drop us an email. Our email address is landlord@theradiatorarms.com. And of course, if you want to just send us anything, then please do. We'd be delighted and occasionally terrified to read it.
But I think the digression we took there was an interesting one, because I think what was clear from that is it's very clear what a Japanese brand is in terms of cars. Mm-hmm. Is it so clear for a British one?
I think that's interesting because historically, if you were to say to me, what makes a British car, there are a couple of things that come to mind. One of which has to be, it's just got to be the Mini.
Yeah.
Because the Mini is a design masterpiece. It's a cultural icon. And I personally think, I'm likely biased here, but I think in terms of motoring decades, the 1960s belongs to Britain.
Yeah.
Right? You had the Mini. Yes, I know it came out in 1959, but it's the car of the 60s. You had the E-Type, which landed in 61. You had the Aston Martin DB5, of course, became the transport of James Bond. Yes, that's an epic car. So you've got there three instantly iconic things. And, gentlemen, I have to mention this now because the thought has popped into my head, but we are being a little bit blinkered here. May I also present for your consideration the international icon that is the black cab?
Oh, of course.
Oh, yeah.
There are few vehicles in the world I can think of where you could drop one anywhere with no signage on it, no badges, no anything, and people would know what it is.
What about the old red London buses?
Same again, was going to say that too. The Route Master.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a design classic. It's a piece of our culture. It's a piece of our heritage, along with a little red telephone box.
Yep.
Which incidentally was the early name of the band Travis.
Oh, you left out one other thing from the 60s that we owned. The World Cup for the one and only time ever.
It's about the only famous footballer I've met as well.
I was going to say, my friend Harry would kill me if I didn't mention this. The other iconic 60s car, the Morris Minor.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that is another thing that is... You see them in America in places as well. Like, I've seen they're all over the world, those cars.
Oh, I've been to meet. In fact, I went to one in Los Angeles at winter, and I would say no fewer than 10 MG midgets. There was a Sprite. There was an MGB, I think. There was about 10 or 12 classic British cars turned up at this meet. And I thought, I would be shocked if that many turned up to a meet here. Because the thing is, over there, they've survived because in California, they haven't had the chance to rust away. But they were so cool, those cars. And there was so much nice about them. And if I was to say anything, I think that to me defines British cars as I would like to remember them, it's style and class.
Yeah.
Like, there is something just wonderfully elegant about a proper British car. I mean, Ant and I experienced this a little bit with stuff we've driven over the years. I had it when I was out in Andorra. I was driving the E-Type around, E-Type convertible.
As you do, just driving around the mountains,
Yeah,
casually.
It's just another day at work, another day at the office.
It is. And kids were going mad for it. And I'm talking 4, 5, 6-year-olds, they don't know really what a Jaguar is, right? They don't know what an E-Type is. They don't know how much money it is or isn't worth. But there's something about it. There must be something sort of somewhat primal that makes them look at it and go, that is cool. In the same way that I might look at one of your guitars and be like, that's awesome. And you might be like, oh, yes, James, this is a Les Paul. It's one of the most iconic guitars of all time. But I'd be like, I don't blooming know. I don't care. But there's just something inherently about it. And the E-Type's got that. The Mini as well. And I think the Mini, it came to me recently because I did a video with one. It was a 1970s one. And this is quite fascinating, right? It was made by a company called Wood and Pickett. So when the Mini came out, because anybody and everybody wanted one, this whole cottage industry sprang up to modify Minis because, of course, the factory would only ever do so much. So if you were ultra wealthy or a Beetle and you wanted a Mini as well, you didn't want a Mini just like everyone else's. So people would go and spend multiple times the value of the car on getting it made up. And this Mini was made by one of the better known companies called Wood and Pickett. It's got the front end of a Vauxhall on it.
What?
Yeah. They hacked off the front end of a Vauxhall, so it doesn't look like a Mini from the front at all.
What's it called?
It's a Wood and Pickett.
Wood and Pickett.
Yeah, Pickett. And it's just the most fascinating thing to look at. You'd be like, and you can see, because they've had to then cut the Vauxhall front in half to make it small enough to fit on the front of this Mini. It's just bizarre.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen those.
Yeah.
Let's have a look.
No.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting look. But I don't think it looks awful, that.
No, but it doesn't look like a Mini.
No.
Does it? It's a bit odd.
Looks like a larder.
Yeah, it does.
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
British larder.
Yeah. So the Mini is, I think...
There's a lot of contemplation there on that face. Honestly, there's a lot of processing going on. I wasn't sure if that's a good or a bad thing, or I should just move on to the next thought.
Move on.
Yeah. The Mini, I think, I'm not sure any other car has quite so successfully
Been ruined. Oh, sorry.
been so many things to so many people, because the original Mini, it appealed to people on a budget, right? It appealed to celebrities that had one and wanted to drive back town. Supermodels would drive them because it was the thing to have, right? You could run it as a family car because, back in the day, everything was a bit of a compromise. So you just did, right? Then it went racing as well. And not just in, traditional disciplines, people took it on the rally. As he famously Paddy Hopkirk winning all this and the other. You're like, I can't think of any car which has had so much success across such a broad range of different disciplines, I suppose you would call it, or in different areas as the Mini. And I don't think we're ever likely to see its like again. I mean, it joins, I think, a really, really small, automotive elite, which includes stuff like the Citroen 2CV, the VW Beetle, and probably the Fiat 500 as well, as genuine cultural icons.
Yeah.
Original Minis are just cool.
Do you know what? I've never driven an original Mini, a 2CV or a Beetle. I feel like they're things I need to experience at some point.
We'll take the front seat out and then you probably enjoy it. Yeah.
I want to drive a Mini. My parents had a Mini. I think I was about 7 or 8 years old, and it was this navy blue one, and it had the little plastic wheel arch extensions.
Yeah.
It was just such a dinky little thing, and it was just so, I don't know, just very raw. But I got a ride in one about 5 years ago, in a one that had been restored, and I think it was the same colour, similar colour. Getting into that Mini was just like, this is tight, and it is a death trap. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's a death trap.
100%. The Mini is one of those cars that, for various reasons, I've never been particularly in love with it. And then I get a drive of one, and about half an hour later, I'm in love with it. But I also know full well, if you left me in there for another hour, I'd be out of love with it again because you'll have got tired of it. You'll be like, right, I'm done. So I recently got to drive this 1975 Mini. And again, remember also, how many other cars can you think of that were in production almost unchanged for 41 years?
Yep. Can't think of anything else.
Rover retired it in 2000.
Wow,
the Beetle?
Yeah.
The Beetle and maybe the 2CV.
Yeah.
And that's about it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because Toyota obviously will say that the Corolla is the best-selling car of all time, which I think is technically true. But it's also existed in about, 10 different generations. Whereas the Mini was more or less the same car from start to end. Okay, yeah, they changed it, they revised it. And honestly, how they kept it going towards the end, I don't know. In fact, our good friend, Dr. Andy Palmer, did say that one of the things he was proudest of is as a young man, when he was at Rover, he helped to build the catalyzed version of the A-Series engine. Because they wanted to keep the thing going, but they weren't sure if it would actually be possible to make it work. And that's something he was really, really proud of, was, getting it to work.
They had to do something quite odd to make the cat fit, wasn't it?
Yeah, I would also, the whole thing was built to not have a cat. It's actually, again, it's an incredibly innovative piece of engineering because you've got the transmission is in the sump, isn't it? It's all really very compact. It's an absolute masterpiece. Yeah, and like you say, death trap, complete and total. I'd want no son of mine driving a Mini about as a young person because a keen cyclist could cut the car in half.
Yeah,
and that's. I once had somebody on my smart car video, right, tell me that they didn't think there was much smart about a smart car. Oh yeah, look at Jimmy Carr over here, right? They didn't think there's much smart about a smart car because you can fit 2 people in that, but in an original Mini, you can fit 4 people. And I said, yeah, but try and get an original Mini to even vaguely pass any kind of modern crash or emissions regs. It's not going to. He said, yeah, but I'd much rather have a crash in an original Mini. Rather you than me. All that'll be left is a sort of fine paste at the end. Whereas the smart car, 5th gear, sent one into a concrete barrier, didn't they? It's 70 mile an hour. And it would have blooming hurt, but you would have got out.
Yeah, I remember there's loads of panels and everything flew off, but the actual structural cage of it was all in one piece. And I think they could even open the door. I'm gonna have to go back and watch that. But I remember that being a hugely good bit of marketing for the Smart, wasn't it?
So, slight tangent here, but please, gentlemen, permit me.
We always do.
I think Mercedes made one fundamental mistake with the Smart.
Okay.
Right, the original Smart. They pitched it as transport for the masses, right? Your smart, sensible, urban runabout, yeah? Built in an incredibly innovative way. Even the factory itself was built in a really cool way, which incidentally now is where the Ineos manufacture their stuff. So it's the same site in France. However, what they did was they looked at what most people's usage is, and they realized that for the most part, people only have one passenger in a car. A lot of the time, people don't have people in the back of their car. But the Smart was pitched at the end of the market where it could be sold to people as their one and only car. And the problem is that people that have one car need one car that can do everything. They don't need something that fits 90% of their requirements. If once a month they have someone in the back of the car, that means they have to have back seats available to them all the time, right? And so the Smart car didn't work for people on a really limited budget, except in maybe specific circumstances. I think what they should have done is basically predated the Aston Martin Signet, right? And made the Smart car really upmarket, gone really posh with it, made the interior really high quality and gone, yeah, it is the same price as an A-Class and it's half the size, but it's also twice as nice inside. Made it like a luxury, made it like the Louis Vuitton handbag or whatever of cars.
Yeah.
And I think it would have had a success of a very, very different kind, but instead they were trying to go for this big production numbers and it just didn't work. And then of course they did the Smart 4 and everything and it just it didn't work.
I nearly bought a Smart 4 once, actually.
They're cool cars.
Yeah, I remember seeing it and thinking, oh, it's got a manual, and actually it's quite spacious in there as well.
I am thinking of buying a Smart 2, like an original one.
I tell you what, I actually think that would be an amazing little town runabout for you.
Yeah.
I think that'd be great.
I also think, I'm going to go out on a limb here, I think it's a design classic.
Yeah.
It's an excellent piece of engineering, and I really admire it for what they tried to do with it.
Are they massively expensive?
No. Couple of grand.
I know which one he's going to get.
Yeah, you're showing him a picture of a Brabus, aren't you?
Ooh.
No, I'm not.
Oh, you know? Oh, it's not
gonna
a
hate this.
crossblade, is it? What?
I'll see if I can dig out my photo.
So,
if
what
not,
I'm
there's
looking
one.
at appears to be a red Smart car with what I can only describe as the front grille from a Ferrari 550 Maranello.
Yep.
In a hot wash that's been put into it, a sort of splitter at the front that makes it look like it's had a nasty reaction to a bee sting, some pretty chunky arches, and two Ferrari badges. And pray tell, what is this abomination called?
It's just a Smart car. It's just people have. There's several of them. People have just taken their Smarts and slapped some Ferrari badges on them. And they're obviously always red ones. Sometimes they put a body kit on it. This one I think is a Brabus one from London. But then again, it's just, people just being silly.
That is kind of
Listen,
hilarious.
what he needs to do if he gets one, and it wouldn't be the first person to do it. I'm sure you said it a lot. People who kind of wrap them or paint them to be in the style of the cozy coupes that they had as kids. Those little ones with the red, with the yellow roofs and stuff that you.
The little Tykes car.
Yeah.
That's what you need to do.
Brilliant.
I would unironically drive that everywhere and love it.
They drive nicely as well.
I've always been curious about a Brabus Smart car, like the proper.
No, they're cool.
Yeah. It was 4.2 is the. But they didn't call it that at the first.
No,
It was just the Smart.
Actually, I think it was called the City Coupe. I believe is what they called it. And then, they later called it the 4.2 to differentiate it from the 4.4. And they did the Roadster. The Roadster's quite a laugh. I don't know how you'd fit in one of those either.
You'll be surprised what tight spaces I can fit in. Sorry,
Don't doubt it. I don't doubt it.
Because I can fit in an original Mini. I haven't driven one, but I have actually been in a few when I used to do radio work and stuff like that. And it means I had to sit in the driver's seat and I fit.
I was going to say, what kind of angle do you have to be in order to fit into the original Mini, like sideways?
Something like that. It's much like you took a photo of us of me in the back of the GI Yaris, didn't you? And it's a little bit like that. And my head.
Now I'm just imagining you like Mr. Bean sat in a sofa on top of the thing with some, broom handles trying to pilot it.
Oh dear.
But I want to get us back to the Mini.
Yes.
Right. So obviously then later on, BMW bought the brand.
Yep.
and decided to build their own. What was the first one? The R53,
Three.
which personally I kind of liked.
Oh, it's brilliant. That is a masterclass in how to update a classic for the modern age.
Yep. The 56 was good as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the R, the F. I don't like the second generation kind of new Mini because they were horrendously unreliable. The engines went pop, bang, left, right, and centre. And I think they were using possibly some Peugeot engines and things like that, which had issues in other brands.
Yeah, you're
as well.
talking about the PSA, the second gen, R56s,
And we have personal experience in the family with that. My father-in-law had one, and yeah, basically it was drinking more oil than petrol. And we called it Old Bluey because it was all to do is blew smoke out that, and it was all blue. But my wife, as I've said before, she had the F56 one after that. Brilliant car, amazing car, and we would still have it had she not needed to change to.
It lost a little bit of the soul, though, I felt.
Perhaps, but as an car, it was a good car.
No, for sure, it is better as a car, but also there's something about when you talk about cars from certain nations, this will always involve an element of stereotyping, right? And stereotyping comes in many different forms. Now, for example, talk about an American car and you're going to think of, big, meaty muscle cars, huge engine, huge weight figure, can't go around a corner to save its life, and interior made out of old recycled dustbins.
Like a current Mini.
So
Sorry.
You think Italian car and you'll think beautiful, gorgeous, stylish, high revving, naturally aspirated, wondrous to look at, but maybe not so reliable. That's what you're going to think, yeah? Japanese, meanwhile, not the last word in style, but will go to the moon and back and not fail at any point in time. France. You cannot do a video on a French car. It is illegal to do a video on a French car without using at least once the word quirky. Right? Because that is what they are. This morning when you came and collected me, I was halfway through editing a video on a Panard.
What's that?
Yeah, that's what I thought you was going to say. Panard, as it's spelt, was a French car company, actually one of the earliest car companies in the world, dated back to, I think, 1887. And it eventually wound up being bought out by Citroën. And unfortunately, it's one of these companies that I would love still to exist, but they kind of mismanaged it. And so what they did was you had this really weird model lineup whereby you had, that's what I was driving effectively.
That's the most famous one.
So you had the 24 as the last car they built, and it was a 24 that I drove. So what you had was a model lineup where at the bottom you had the Citroën 2CV. Then at the top you had the DS, and then in the middle was the Panard. So it didn't really make much sense. It wasn't sort of like where you go like, okay, well here's your, like VW do it, where you've got your Seat at the bottom, then VW, then Audi, and so on, or where Renault have like, well here's your Dacia, and then here's your Renault above it, and then here over Citroën you got your Citroën, then you got the DS now. An Alpine for your sporty stuff. So the Panard wound up being sort of stuck in the middle, and it had some really cool engineering and interesting stuff about it. But they kind of got just stuffed by Citroën because Citroën didn't want to spend any money on it. So they were trying to soldier on with technology that by that point in time was quite out of date. And the company just kind of floundered and then just sort of, wound up being integrated into the rest of Citroën. But it's a shame because it's a really, really cool business. But yeah, French cars, quirky, unusual, do things a little bit different, a little bit funky. British cars, to me, not the most reliable, but they should have class and style, and preferably, for the luxury stuff certainly, a bit of opulence. Like I like to think a correctly done British car interior should be like very little else out there. Now, bits of it may come off in your hand, but those bits will be beautiful to hold. But, look, Range Rover. Like, even still now, the Range Rover is not only the car that invented its class, the luxury off-roader thing, it is still the benchmark in its class. And there aren't many cars that can say that 55 years later. The Defender, the Defender is an icon.
Yep.
I think it's a horrible, hateful little thing. In first guys, and I include all Land Rovers in there. But by which I mean the proper series Land Rovers. I know a few people that have owned them, and they've generally all agreed that it was fun and everything. But after about an hour, you do just want to just push it into a river and claim the insurance money. It's not exactly refined.
Yeah, I've driven a Defender 110. It was a long time ago, and I do remember it feeling very agricultural. However, it did feel like it was probably just going to go anywhere and do anything and go on. And if it did break down, you could spit on it and it would suddenly work again.
Yeah. You can fix it with a hammer.
Yes.
Which is just as well, because they break quite easily.
Yes.
And I often say to people that I think if they'd built the early Land Rovers properly, they'd probably be out of business, because they have such a business for spare parts. They will sell you effectively anything you want from an original Defender, including a new chassis.
Do you follow that? Is it that Tatty? Is that her name?
Oh, is it over in the Rover?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
I look at some of her content sometimes. I think it's great. Like, she just sat broken down at the side of the road in this Land Rover. But then, she's just getting out there and fixing it and getting it going again as if it's just a normal part of her day. And I think that's kind of actually quite great about the cars, that they just don't need much to get them going when they break again.
You can't have a Land Rover and not have a sense of humour.
Yes, I think that's very true.
What do you think of British cars, Anne?
Well, I've got a very a great deal of affection for Bristols, obviously.
Yes, of course.
We've talked about that. TVRs, I've always had a sort of hankering for them.
Oh, we still haven't got your hat one yet, have we?
We almost did, but we had to reschedule that one. I think there was weather.
Yeah, British weather.
Got in the way of me driving the British car. I did not want to drive that in anything other than bone dry conditions. I always fancied those. The Farbood was technically British, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and there's a new one.
There is a new one.
Yeah.
Trying to get something done with that. And one of the more recent British car makers, McLaren.
Oh, McLaren. Oh, God. How did I not think of that? It's so funny, because I just think of them as not being...
But what I like about McLaren existing is that probably in terms of road cars, it's the most direct connection we have to what is still, I think, a real point of pride, which is that in terms of the motorsports world, Britain is the centre of the universe.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, even in karting, like, kids come here to race because it's puts you up against some of the toughest racers in the world because of just the whole karting community here.
Yeah.
It is really genuinely the case. I met parents when Damani was racing who came here from Germany, from Brazil, from all over the world for their kids to race here because it was the toughest racing. But then also you've got the engineering. There's that whole, F1 Valley, so to speak, Motorsport Valley, I think it's called, where like Brackley, Silverstone, all of those areas there, that's full of Formula One cars. Near there, you've also got the name of that tunnel, which escapes me momentarily, even though I've made a whole video on the thing. Will come back to me.
Not Hindhead Tunnel, is
no,
it?
No. This is the aerodynamic tunnel.
Yeah, I remember the one. Wasn't it an old railway tunnel? Isn't it?
It was an old railway tunnel.
Yeah.
The name of it will come back to me momentarily.
The secret testing tunnel.
Testing tunnel. Yeah, we were one of the first people to get going there.
That's very cool.
But what's cool about McLaren is it's largely British engineered, British manufactured and assembled, and designed.
Yeah, even the tub's made here.
Yep. And I think we should definitely hold a lot of pride in that. And the other tradition they maintain is poor build quality. It's not a British brand if it doesn't seem like it was built in a shed.
Do you know what? When I think of British brands, there's always one word that comes to mind. And especially when I think about the 80s and 90s stuff. Do you want to know what it is?
Go on.
Corrosion.
Yeah, so do you know what's funny about this, right? Is that one of the great British failures that I've driven was the Allegro. And you know what? There are a great many stories out there about the British car industry, things that happened, the shenanigans in the workforce. And if you'd like to know about some of those, please watch the video interview I did with a chap called Rich Duisberg, who I would love to get on the podcast at some point because he's awesome. And he used to work in quality control in the 1990s, visiting various manufacturers around the world. And some of the stuff, particularly from Britain, was just unbelievable. Like the lack of care with which they assemble the cars. He said if they dedicated the same amount of passion and enthusiasm and precision to building the cars as they did shirking off work, the British car industry would be far and away the best in the world. But there was just this sort of like, you know, culture of complacency and miscompliance, shall we say. But, you know, there's something about it that is also quite tragic, not just because it all failed and went to hell, but because in a lot of cases, there were cars that were fundamentally quite good, but failed because one element of it had been particularly overlooked or one part of it wasn't done quite right and it sort of didn't really make all that much sense. I mean, so I've recently driven, amongst other things, your Maestro. And the Maestro is one of these cars that, because it was already old and retired by the time I was growing up, I didn't really ever think about it beyond it's an old, crappy British car from a brand that had, you know, been long since dormant. In fact, was the Maestro the last thing to wear the Austin badge?
I think it might have been, along with the Austin Metro, and I think the Mini also was an Austin Mini as well.
Yeah, and became Rover,
I think
didn't
they
it?
had the Ambassador and a couple of other things and stuff like that. I can't remember exactly.
The Ambassador, I think, sort of predates it by quite a bit, I think.
Did it? Was that a 70s car initially?
Yeah.
Was it? Okay.
Hey, do you know what I've been offered to go of?
What's that?
A Princess.
Excellent.
Yeah, the Wedge.
Oh,
I'm quite looking forward to that. Yeah, but with the Maestro, it gained an awful reputation for failure because the engines were very problematic. There's the R series engine, I believe.
The R series was awful and shortly replaced by the S series.
Yeah, but the fascinating thing is it came out of the E series, which I believe was a fundamentally quite good engine, but the R series was a development of it, and they found out, evidently far too late, that the problem they had was that the E series had the gearbox in the sump, as you did with, say, the A series and things. But for the Metro, they wanted to upgrade things, do it a bit better. So they sourced a 5-speed VW gearbox.
That wasn't the Metro, that was the Maestro.
Maestro. Sorry, Maestro. I'm talking about a
Yeah,
Maestro.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm talking about Maestro. Sorry. I get the Maestro and the Metro confused, even though I know they're not the same
Yes.
car. Anyway, so for the Maestro, they sourced this 5-speed VW gearbox. But the VW gearbox, like you would expect it to, bolts onto the side of the engine, which meant that there was no longer really anything in the sump. The issue was, when the thing had been designed, it was designed to have a whole gearbox in the sump, which gives it a lot more rigidity. So when they took that out, it allowed it to flex an amount that it wasn't intended to, and this is what created so many of the problems. They eventually worked out what the issue was and sorted it, but by the time they sorted it, they'd already sold a whole bunch of the things, and they'd already shot their reputation because the car was already behind, it was already, you know, delayed and behind schedule and everything else. So they shipped it effectively before it was ready. The Allegro is also particularly fascinating because the Allegro, again, I found this out when I was researching it, when I drove it, the Allegro had a really bad reputation for corrosion. But they didn't corrode. It got the reputation for corrosion because somebody was interviewing one of the engineers behind it about problems they've been looking to solve, and he'd said that they've been having lots and lots of problems with corrosion with their cars. He was referring to one of the previous cars that they'd made, and for the Allegro, they'd actually fixed the corrosion issue. And for a 1970s car, it actually does really, really well for corrosion. But one report from one bloke mishearing something gave the car a reputation for corroding.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
It was always one of those things I think that has made me sad, like the Maestros and the Metros and stuff, is that obviously British Lane, they just had no money back then whatsoever to do things. And it took so long. I think, is it the LC10 platform, the Maestro, something like that? I think it took so long for them to actually get a car right by the time out of production. It was almost a little bit out of date then, for starters. Yeah. And, you know, those reliability issues it started off with, they stuck with it for the rest of its life. People always talk about, how the Maestro had this digital digital dashboard, that would speak to you. They were notoriously unreliable and crap, so that gave it a bad reputation. There was hot start issues with the R series, as well as them all kind of falling apart and things like that. And there was just so many things that, by the time mine was built in 1990, they had got so much of it right then, and actually by that point it was a good car. For instance, the early Maestros, 8 wheel bearings like no tomorrow, and that's something to do, I think, with engine weights or whatever it was. They fixed that, but all the early reports that stay with the car and are damning will stay with people for the rest of the car's life. They will not want to touch it, and it's such a shame, because in my opinion it's a way better car than it got credit for being.
Catesby Tunnel.
Yes, that's the one.
I had to look it up. I couldn't remember.
Yep.
See, the Italians actually have a very similar thing. Alfa Romeo often do this. They have a bit of a reputation, but then every now and again, that something takes them, and they go, right, this is it. We're going to sort things. We're going up against the Germans. And so they build a car, and they put a huge amount of effort into it, and they get it fundamentally quite right. But very often, maybe in the early days, there'll be a few different issues and things, and so they probably should have put a bit more development into it. However they release it, when they release it. So the early ones are what get reviewed. There's problems. This is what the car becomes known for. However, they don't leave it alone. A couple of years in, they fix it. And then the car is much, much better. And then it's a brilliant car. But by that point in time, all the reviews have already been done. Nobody's going to review a car that's 2 years old. What's the point? But actually, the point is the car's really different now. But then they sit on it for too long. They leave it. Whereas another manufacturer would change car after about 7 or 8 years. Instead, they sit on it for 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years. And by that point, it's way too out of date. It's old. It's had it. It's past its best. And this is what started to happen with Leyland. So I also recently got to drive a Triumph 2500. This is a really fascinating car. And it's another piece of tragedy, because the car was built to compete in a segment which Triumph hadn't historically competed in, which is a kind of mid-size junior executive saloon. And it, along with the Rover P5, is credited for creating the segment that is now what you'd call like the 5 Series segment. And of its time, it was really quite innovative, because it was way sexier than a lot of your other existing stuff from the likes of Austin and so on. And it was a lot nicer than the more entry-level cars that you could buy. And if you were a young man that wanted a nice company car, like the Triumph gave you a lot for your money, had a nice, decent-sized engine in it as well, a 6-cylinder in this case, and it was a cool thing. The problem is that by the time they actually got the thing built, Rover and Triumph had then been taken over by the same company. So you then had 2 cars that have been developed completely separately in the same market, now being sold by effectively 2 different bits of the same company, which is wildly inefficient. And this is when you get stories of basically dealerships from one side of the road to the other competing with each other to try and sell different versions of the same sort of car at knockdown prices until basically nobody's making any money anymore. Unfortunately, we have some cultural issues here in Britain too, where they just did not care about the quality of the product that they were sending out. And it's not like other cars back in the day were great either. French cars were rubbish, German cars were rubbish, all sorts of cars were rubbish, except that they realised that maybe they shouldn't be rubbish, and they worked to improve it, whereas here, we didn't, which is a shame.
Which is also a shame, because there's been a lot of great innovations out of Rover and stuff like that, and British Leyland have made some good things. Even the famed K series engine, which we all think about as blowing head gaskets, which was something that was eventually fixed, and they had updated parts, and the later cars didn't have those issues, but it got the reputation for that for the rest of its life. But it was actually a really at the time, I think it was something like an early aluminium one, and they had loads of fancy bits in it, and it was, I think it might have even had variable valve timing and other stuff like that, for the age and for the time it came out in the 90s. They were actually incredible engines.
Well, the sad thing about Triumph is that the last car they built was the Triumph Acclaim, which is just a Honda.
Yeah.
It is the UK built version of, I think, the Honda Ballade, and it was a really good car. Got amazing reviews, and everybody said, wow, Triumph have fixed their quality problems. This car works. It's a decent car. The problem is The Triumph brand had already been shot to hell by things like the Stag, which was notoriously unreliable. And I think the management looked at it and went, hang on a minute, why design our own cars? We can just build Japanese ones instead and stick our badges on them and they'll actually work. This is a much better idea, except we're not going to do it with the Triumph badge. We're going to do it with a Rover badge. And that's what they did. And so then you entered a period of some of Britain's best cars because they were actually Japanese ones, just built here in slightly poor ways.
Yeah. It's a shame though, isn't it? I mean, just thinking about some of these cars, they were great to look at, and
great to drive.
Yeah, and we've got nothing left apart from McLaren.
Yeah, which is also owned by the Bahrainis. Like, we don't own any of our cars.
Oh, no, we don't. No. Well, we don't. To be honest with you, the rate we're going, I don't know how much of anyone in Britain owns anymore because it's pretty much sold off overseas.
Yeah, it's all privatised, isn't it?
It's all privatised to overseas companies.
Just feel like Ian Beale from EastEnders crying, I've got nothing left.
Wow.
All right, gents, to wrap up, if I were to be able to magic up 3 British, or near as damn it, British cars for you to have a little bit of a go in, what would they be? And
I definitely want to have a go in a Bristol Fighter. That would be my little tick in my box. But obviously, DB5.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
For me, that's just like a no-brainer. Like, I'd love to have a go in one of those.
It's got to be an original Mini for me. I think this one I really need to experience is a Mini because I haven't ever driven one, and they're such icons. You know, that's the one that comes to mind. The British car I have to drive is a good Mini.
Okay, you got 2 more. You know, you can have 2 more.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's just difficult to know what.
While they're thinking about that,
E-Type Eagle.
Eagle E-Type. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. See, also in some ways, is the MZR 240Z almost a British car?
Ooh.
It almost is, isn't it?
I think I'm going to decide that it is.
We're going to declare it British. We're going to adopt it.
It is. Yeah. It's built in Britain. It's a resto. It's basically using the frame as a spare part and building a car from scratch.
Born in Japan, reborn in Britain.
I've got my cars. I think I want to have a go in a nice Rover V8 SD1, something along those lines. And I think like an early Range Rover as well.
Oh, yeah, classic.
Yeah, classic Range Rover. I think that would be a good one to have a go in because they're I feel like they're very important British cars as well. Or maybe something like, I don't know, maybe like an old Triumph or something like that as well. You know, or what's it? Jensen Interceptor. That's a car.
Oh yeah.
Jensen Interceptor,
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and the Interceptor is quite cool, although has the dubious distinction of being the only car I think to ever break down on me during a shoot. There is a great clip of me filming in it, and it started running badly, and then it would die on me whenever I came to a stop, and I was trying to get it, and I pulled up at a junction and it died, and I was reaching the end of my tether. I was just shouting at like, you bastard car, and I realised on the window there's some bloke like walking his dog. He just looked at me. I was like, morning. But you know what, while it worked, which I think is the epitaph of the British car industry, it was really good. Like the whole hour up until I started filming, I was like, this is really nice. This is so well put together. This feels much better built than any Aston of the day or anything else that I've driven. This is really cool. And you could see why they commanded the money that they did. For me, I think I'm going to have to dream big here. I would like to try an old Rolls-Royce Phantom 3. Partly because Rolls-Royce hasn't got much of a mention today, and it is still, I think, regarded by many as the finest quality motor car in the world. And it is one of the coolest cars I've ever driven, the Phantom 7 long wheelbase, just awesome thing. But I would also like to spend some time in a proper 1980s living daylight spec Aston Martin Vantage. I spent a little bit of time in a regular V8, and that was very memorable. I mean, the car is terrible, but the experience is just magnificent. and I do have a potential link to a Vantage V600 to feature at some point as well. But I think also, let us, gentlemen, end this on a high note. If there is one British car that I can pluck from dreamland that I'd really like a go in, it's got to be the McLaren F1.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah,
Handmade
absolutely.
in Britain
Yep.
with a German engine, as it should be. I just think, you know what, it just can't be worth the money. It just can't. But everybody that's driven one has said that it is something quite special. And for so long, again, we talk about cars that hold records that they shouldn't hold for that long. Like the F1 was the fastest car in the world for what, like
Years.
yeah, like a decade at least, till the Veyron came along.
No. It was the SSC.
Yeah, well, I'm taking their numbers with a bag of salt.
Fair enough.
An actual car that you can buy from a real company and it's going to work, run and drive, like it's the Veyron, isn't it, basically? So there's a full decade where the McLaren F1 was the fastest car in the world, having taken over from the Jaguar XJ220, which is also pretty damn cool.
Yeah.
Also a car, actually, I think I'd like to experience.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. Very,
Definitely.
very cool.
Yeah. We know where two might be.
We do. Yeah, watch this space. So, yeah, the McLaren F1, though, it's a Concorde car, isn't it? It's just like this is like a moment in history. It'll never be repeated. Like, but you got to know, right? You just like, there's cars out there where I'm like, don't meet your heroes. And with that, I'm like, it's got to be done. I have to know.
Having sat in one, I have to say that it's a weird experience. I didn't get to drive it. It was actually I showed you the pictures.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I
we
got the
mentioned
picture.
it
Yeah,
on a
yeah,
previous
we did.
episode.
Yep.
Yeah, it was the 7th prototype, I think. XP7.
No, it's XP5.
Oh, XP5. That was
You're
it.
sat in the world record car.
Yes, that was it. I remember it was special, and it's obviously a bit of a pain getting in, but doable and easy enough to learn. Once you're sitting there in the middle of the car, you're like, oh, this is where I'm meant to be sitting all this time. And you realize how odd it is to be sitting on the side of the car, because once you're there, you're like, I'm home.
Yeah.
I'm home. And on that bombshell,
It's time to end. Thank you for listening, everybody. Don't forget, you can find us ready for your Monday commute at 7 a.m. every week. First here on YouTube, and then afterwards on Amazon, Spotify, Apple, and I don't know, a bunch of other places probably too. We don't pay too much attention, but we're out there. If you look for us, you'll find us. And no matter how you do, we thank you for listening to another episode of the Radiator Arms.